a lot of parents think they have to have like the talk.
Right.
But I think little chats along the way, just kind of as you're going along, it reminds me of those verses in the Bible that says, as you walk along with your children, just bring that into the conversation.
So, Dr. Patricia Landry, Pat, I'm gonna call you Dr. Landry, right?
Yeah. Oh, Pat is fine.
Any of them, yes. I just want to, I really am excited to begin to talk about God's design of the body.
Oh, it is amazing.
You specialize in that. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, I'm a family physician. I've been a family physician for going on about 30 years now. I've been fortunate to have practiced in the same small town. So when I first started, I actually delivered babies. So I had the privilege of actually seeing some of these babies grow up and head off to college, which is just amazing. A tremendous privilege. It really is.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So Psalm 139, is you familiar?
Oh, that is one of my absolute favorites.
Yes. Beautiful. Yes. Beautiful to think about God's design of our bodies. And you're all in on that. You have a column with Clubhouse.
Yes.
On God's bodily oddities. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But it says in verse 13, it says, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well."
Yes, my soul knoweth it right well.
Isn't that great? Yes.
Tremendous.
Love those words. And so what are your favorite bodily oddities that God has created? It says fearfully and wonderfully made, and we have these odd things in our bodies. What are some of your favorites?
Yes. Well, one of my favorites is actually that we have 3 different types of muscle. We have skeletal muscle, over which we have control. We have kind of like an autonomic type of muscle, smooth muscle that we don't really have control over. God has kind of put that on autopilot for us. But more importantly, we have cardiac muscle, which is incredibly special. They say if they take 2 heart cells and they can be beating separately, and you put them together, and all of a sudden they are joining together and beating in harmony. And the cool thing about the heart is the heart has its own little pacemaker cells, so it creates its own heart rhythm. So it beats on its own accord. We don't have to ask our heart to beat. It just does it.
Imagine how distracting that would be.
Well,
all day long, right?
Yes, if you had to wake up every morning and go through this checklist, like, okay, is my heart beating? Are my lungs expanding and taking in oxygen? And the cool thing even about when we go to sleep at night, our body takes over these automatic functions and lets us, keep breathing and have our heart beating and all this processing that goes on while we're sleeping. And that's just part of how God has fashioned our body.
So why do you think boys, young boys, are so attracted to the topic of boogers?
Why?
That's one of the oddities. You wrote an article on that topic of boogers. Yeah.
Well, boogers are just like up close and personal.
Right. Yeah. They can be gross and the whole thing, but they serve a function, gross. Right, within that incredible design.
They have a fantastic function. So a lot of our body's surfaces are covered with mucous membranes. So the inside of our nose is covered with mucous membranes. And so mucous membranes make mucus.
Yeah.
And you get a glob of mucus and it becomes a booger.
Gross.
Becomes a booger.
Yeah.
But actually,
it's cleaning everything, right?
It does. It kind of has a cleaning mechanism. It entraps things that we don't want in our body. Yeah. It kind of flushes things out of our body. So boogers are, they have a very important function.
I almost think about it from a spiritual standpoint, right?
Yes.
Certain things that help protect the body and then protecting our soul are certain things that we need to put in place, spiritual disciplines and other things. And it's just filtering, right, of our body, and we get to filter our mind as well. And so that's a great conversation with boys that I've had along the way. I have a son, and we had our moments talking about that. And I remember having your column in the Clubhouse magazine on the topic, and I said, "Look, son, there's a design for these
Yes.
within God's perfect design." Any other odd ones that I know you? You've talked about the tongue, and just everything within the tongue.
Right, just all the different taste cells, and it always reminds me of how it says to taste and see of the goodness of God. It's just incredible. The other thing that guys often like is we have these little salivary glands underneath our tongue. So sometimes they fill up with all of this fluid. And I don't know if you've ever had the experience when you've been talking and all of a sudden it seems like saliva has just spurted out. That is called bleeding. And, some guys, young boys, they do like to, kind of excel at that skill.
That's right.
It's not quite an Olympic sport yet, but
that's
you never know.
Yeah, it does happen out there. Yeah, I remember that in junior high. I remember seeing that happen in the classroom. And so that's weird, those designs, but there's always purpose.
Yes.
And one of the things in James, it talks about the tongue being something so important that we
being such a small
control.
Member, but yet having such power.
Such power. And then the design of it is so incredible in the way that we taste the goodness, like you were saying, of things coming in our mouth. Mm-hmm. And we know that with kids, we tell them that the tongue is so important. It reveals your heart, and with it, you can also praise other people, lift them up, bring amazing things.
Right, can be a source of encouragement.
Just like food comes to our mouth, right? And so there's so many things there that parents can be teaching their kids through these bodily oddities that we've got, right?
Another of the favorite bodily oddities that I like is actually the funny bone.
Oh, the funny bone, yes, that's a good one.
Which is really not a bone.
It's not funny when you hit it.
Well, it feels kind of weird, in that kind of sense. But
where is it?
It's actually the ulnar nerve, so it's just right under through here. And I'm not really sure why they decided to call it the funny bone. Yeah. But we do have a bone in our upper arm that, of all things, is called the humerus. So how cool is that?
That's funny, yes. Whoever was naming it was having a good time.
Evidently.
That's right.
Evidently.
Wow.
And it's always struck me as very interesting why we find certain things funny. Is funny a certain sense? And why do some people have a sense of humor? And some seem maybe not to have quite that same sense developed as much.
Right. That's very true. So one thing that I'm asked a lot, and this is in my practice as a counselor, is just the growing pains that boys and girls go through.
Right,
and as they hit that preteen age, they have a moment of a lot of pain and frustration with their own body. Tell us a little bit about that. Where do growing pains come from? And how do we handle that in a good way with our kids?
The interesting thing, I don't know if they've actually discovered where growing pains do come from. They do tend to be more like on your upper thighs, on your calves, sometimes behind your knees. And it seems to be more pronounced when you've had more activity throughout the day. And for some reason, they say they're a little bit more common in girls than they are in boys, which you would almost think to be the opposite.
Yeah, I remember having to wear little knee braces during basketball season in junior high, and I remember the knees hurting. I mean, it's not that I grew to 7 feet or anything.
Right.
But there's some growing pains happening at that time.
Yes. So they do say, though, that if you relax before you go to bed at night, if you put warm compresses on it, sometimes that can be helpful, staying well hydrated. There's some indication it might be related even to restless leg syndrome. But,
interesting.
But it still kind of remains one of those sort of mysteries. Fortunately, people outgrow them. There's not any lasting detriment from them. So.
Yeah, that's good. It's good. It's good for parents to lean in and validate the fact that they're feeling something that is different and maybe painful, more so for some than others. So, especially if you're growing tall, right? Super tall and all the tall stretching out. Right? So this is another one. It's another one that kids have asked, and that's about freckles.
Oh,
Freckles. They ask about freckles and zits. Those are two things that a lot of insecurity comes from those. And so let's talk about those. What are freckles, and how do we talk to our kids about that?
Freckles are kind of cool because we have in our skin cells these particular ones that are called melanocytes that make the pigment. So they're sort of like ink producers. So whenever people that are usually more fair-skinned are exposed to sunlight, these melanocytes will actually produce more of this pigment, so they will develop those freckles. And I remember when I was writing the Bodily Oddity column about freckles, I kind of brought in the whole idea about bananas, because, bananas, they sort of develop these dark spots too. So the big question was, do bananas get freckles, or are those really age spots?
Oh, yeah,
So,
What do you think? I think age spots.
I think age spots too. I think age spots too. But
I don't like it when my bananas start turning that way. But
I think bananas actually get the age spots, not the freckles.
So how can parents help their kids that feel insecurity around just a tremendous amount of freckles, and do they flare up a bit?
Yeah, a lot of times if you wear sun protection, it can help the freckles from becoming more pronounced, because they are stimulated by exposure to sunlight. People with different skin tones tend to be more prone to developing freckles. And I guess it's just kind of a cultural thing. Some people find freckles to be
beautiful.
Very, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times the insecurities come from misperceptions and misunderstandings and projections of what we think.
Right.
Or from one comment or two comments.
Right. Or feeling that we're different from somebody else, rather than really embracing who God made us to be.
Right. That's that fearfully and wonderfully made. And so encouraging our kids to lean into that and to see this is a unique design that you've got. And let's look for the beauty in that. Okay, this is a big one. Let's go to zits for a moment.
Zits a moment.
What's a good way if somebody's struggling with acne? Because that's another thing people will ask, especially teenagers will say, what in the world is the purpose of acne? Why would God create us with this season, our most impactful season of our lives, and we have acne come on at the same time, and it creates these insecurities, long-lasting questions. Let's talk about that a little bit.
It really is difficult to have that at such a challenging time. A lot of it comes about because during puberty, we have a release of a lot of different of the hormones that increase the production of sebum in the sebaceous glands. And a lot of times as those pores get clogged up, it allows the inflammation and the swelling and the little pustules to form. But a lot of times just keeping, a pretty good skincare regimen can help with that.
Now you recommend, just as far as cleaning, is it once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day for a teen person that has oily skin? Any thoughts on that?
I would probably say twice a day, probably in the morning and in the evening. Sometimes you can actually, if you clean too much and get too dry of a skin, it can actually kind of be counterproductive.
Yeah, it's just tough. I've seen some kids have a tremendous amount of anxiety around that.
Sure. And they always come at the most inopportune time.
Right. Yeah. I remember getting a huge one right before going on one of those early dates, right, in the 17, 18 year range, and you assume that there's a mountain right there, and that all you can see is that. And so there are assumptions
and there's
made.
so much pressure with some of them. They really do. They feel like they just take on this life of their own.
Right.
And I guess they sort of do.
Yeah, they do. So, and that brings me to the other one on just talking to our kids about hygiene. From an early age, how do you start that conversation? Let's start with a preteen.
Okay.
Because many preteens aren't aware of that early on, 9, 10, 11. All of a sudden they're smelly and they don't know it.
Right.
But other people do.
Right.
They just lack awareness with it.
Yeah.
How does a parent start that conversation in a gentle way, in a life-giving way? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of it will just come from just kind of maybe even modeling that with your own approach to it. And gently just saying that during this season in your life, we just have to be a little bit more careful about how our skin cells are responding to, once again, the hormone changes. We do have, certain sweat glands in our armpit area and the axillary area that do tend to make some pretty odoriferous.
Odoriferous, yeah. You're a little odoriferous.
You're a little odoriferous, yes.
That's so true.
And sometimes it might even be helpful to get like a kind of a code word to let children
It's
know
time for deodorant.
I mean,
Maybe it's time, right?
maybe.
It can be fun to go shopping with your preteen, and I mean, you can make it fun.
Right.
To go and look for the right scent, and this is what you're going to be putting on, and make it exciting with our kids.
Make it a fun time.
Yeah. And some kids become a little bit insecure as well if they're getting hair earlier than others, that difference thing that you're talking about.
Right.
How do we talk to our kids about that? The hygiene of that, the care for that, but also the reality that bodies are different at this stage, especially. You see big differences.
Yeah. And the thing too is with kids developing earlier, different ages, sometimes if you're the first person in your sort of group to be developing, you kind of feel almost like the person who's kind of out of sync with everybody else. So it does make it a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
So I think maybe just trying to embrace our individuality can be important.
That's so hard for kids at that age, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dr. Landry? Yeah. I mean, it really is. For us as parents, we get to have amazing boats those preteen years, and we need to make time for intentional, life-giving conversations with our kids about a variety of topics.
Right.
And one big one is this hygiene one, because they could really be made fun of at school. Other things could come up if we don't step into that out of fear of hurting their feelings.
And then the more self-conscious they become, it just kind of creates this downward spiral where they lose that confidence in themselves.
Yeah, that's good. And with the body changes, what are creative ways that parents can talk about the body changes as they're coming, but also in anticipation? How does a parent even start that conversation with their young 7, 8, 9-year-old child?
Right. I think a lot of parents think they have to have like the talk.
Right.
But I think little chats along the way, just kind of as you're going along, it reminds me of those verses in the Bible that says, as you walk along with your children, just bring that into the conversation. But you're right, it is challenging to know how to first approach that with them.
Right.
But, going shopping, maybe when it's time to find clothes for school with their changing bodies, they're, talk about, oh gosh, your shoe size is now increased because you're growing. And just kind of make it a fun experience.
I think parents can set the tone for that by being real positive about it, being excited of these changes that are happening, but also validating the fact that they may be feeling some insecurities with that. That especially if they're much taller than everyone else, or their feet are much bigger and they haven't grown into the feet that they've got. Right there are a lot of odd things that happen. I remember a young, I was a freshman in high school, and this young man in our class was 6'9".
Oh wow!
Super self-conscious. Yet everyone dreamed of being 6'9". I never got there. And he was real close to the rim, and he didn't want to go. He didn't want to change with everyone else. He had long pants. He was very self-conscious of his own body. You could see he was very uncomfortable with it. And then there were some that were very short, and you could tell they were self-conscious because everyone else grew and they didn't, and they felt totally different. At this age, it's so important for us to validate moments that may be tough for our kids, and I think that you've given us some good ideas here, just to start that conversation. And I really just as we wrap up, let's just talk about God's incredible design of the body. And you said little micro conversations throughout the development. What are some important conversations to have with our preschool kids about God's incredible design of their body that will help shape kind of that trajectory into the school age years and then preteen years and then teen years, because it's all comprehensive.
Right.
What are those initial conversations around this design?
Yeah, preschool kids are just so inquisitive about everything that is going on. They hear their stomach rumble and they're like, what was that?
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, it's like, ooh.
We got an earthquake in here.
Yeah, is there like a tiger in my tank?
Yeah,
or
something's in there.
What happened there?
Right.
And then, of course, one of the things that I guess all of society is really embarrassed about is the whole thing about passing gas.
Yeah,
you know,
the
it's
toots.
just, yeah.
It's a big one at preschool.
Well,
yeah.
it is.
And
It
beyond.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know they like burping, and so you know some of the little preschool kids will say, "Oh, I had an upper burp and I had a bottom burp,"
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and they just take it all in stride. Whereas you know most of us become more self-conscious and we pretend that it doesn't happen to us.
Right.
You know, like
right.
we don't do that.
Yeah, we don't
you know,
do that.
we
No,
don't do
never.
that.
Yeah.
But our body begs to differ.
Yes. So talking about all those different things in God's design for each of those, and the humor in
Yes.
some of it, right?
Yes.
That we find humorous, and we tend to. It has a function within our bodies. Well,
Right.
if you want age and stage resources from Focus on the Family, make sure you visit mykidsage.com, and sign up to have age-specific resources sent right to you around these topics: physical, spiritual growth, mental development, emotional development, all the different aspects of your child's development. So again, make sure you look for that, mykidsage.com. Pat, thank you for being with me
My
and for
pleasure.
talking about
Thank
these
you so
things.
much.
Hopefully we'll do
Yes,
this
it
again.
was fun.
All right.
Thank you.